This story is titled, Parents Raised My Rent to Support My Golden Child Brother. So I left, and now they're desperate for me to come back. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something real with you. The channel's been slowing down a bit recently, and honestly, I put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey everyone, my name's Alex and I'm 22. I don't usually post about personal stuff, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. My family situation has been a mess lately, and I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe hearing some outside perspectives will help me figure things out. So, here goes. I'm currently in college, studying software design. It's something I've been passionate about for a long time, and my dream is to start my own company someday. I work part-time as a junior developer to save up money for my future, while also covering my personal expenses. Since my college is close to my parents' house, I decided to live at home to save on transportation and rent costs. But let me make this clear. I'm not freeloading. I pay my parents $550 every month to contribute to rent and other household expenses. I figured it was fair because it's probably what I'd spend if I lived with roommates, so why not help out my family instead? Things were going fine, or at least as fine as they could be living with my parents. Don't get me wrong, my relationship with them has always been a little complicated. It's pretty obvious they have a favorite child. My older brother, Ryan, is the golden child of the family. He's 23, married, and has 2 kids. Growing up, he was always the one who got into trouble. Skipping school, getting into fights, breaking curfews, you name it, Ryan did it. But no matter what he did, my parents always had his back. Meanwhile, I've been the one who tries to follow the rules, work hard, and stay out of trouble, yet I never get the same level of support or attention. Anyway, about a year ago, Ryan moved out with his wife and kids after borrowing money from my parents and his in-laws to start a business. He claimed it was this big opportunity in construction, and he even bought a house. I was skeptical, but I figured, hey, maybe this time he's actually serious about taking responsibility. Fast forward to now, and surprise, surprise, he's back. He showed up at my parents' house with his entire family, claiming he just needs to stay for a while until a massive payout from his business comes through. He's talking about millions of dollars and promising to buy our family a mansion in some rich neighborhood once he gets the money. My parents are eating it up like it's gospel, hanging on to every word he says. Here's the problem. While Ryan and his family live here rent-free, I'm still expected to pay my $550 every month. And guess how much Ryan is paying? Yep, zero. Nada. Zilch. My parents don't seem to care that he's contributing nothing. It's like they're blind to the fact that he's been leeching off everyone around him his entire life. Meanwhile, the house has turned into complete chaos. Ryan's 2 kids are adorable, but they're toddlers, so they're naturally loud and messy. They've taken over the living room with their toys, and it's impossible to find any peace and quiet. I've tried setting up my workspace in my room, but even that isn't safe. The kids burst in constantly, and Ryan doesn't even try to stop them. He just laughs it off like it's no big deal. His wife isn't much better. She leaves their mess everywhere, from dirty dishes in the sink to laundry piling up in the hallway. What really gets to me is that Ryan and his wife act like they own the place. They've completely taken over the kitchen, and if I so much as ask for a turn to cook, I get eye rolls and passive-aggressive comments about how family shares everything. Yeah, except apparently they don't share in paying for anything. I tried talking to my parents about it, but they just brush me off. My mom told me I need to understand that Ryan is going through a tough time and that family helps family. When I asked if Ryan was going to start pitching in for rent or groceries, she got defensive and told me not to bring it up again. At this point, I feel like a stranger in my own home. I work hard to save money and plan for my future, but it feels like none of that matters to my parents. All they care about is Ryan and his business that may or may not even exist. It's like they're living in this fantasy world where Ryan is some kind of self-made millionaire, and I'm just here to foot the bill while they wait for his big payday. I thought about moving out, but the idea stresses me out. Rent is expensive, and I don't have a huge income. My part-time job pays decently, but between tuition, bills, and trying to save for my future, there's not a lot left over. Plus, I feel like moving out would be admitting defeat. Why should I have to uproot my life because Ryan refuses to take responsibility? It's not fair. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is whether I'm in the wrong here. Should I suck it up and pay more to keep the peace? Or am I right to feel like this is completely unfair? I've always been the type of person who avoids conflict, but this situation is pushing me to my limit. I'm tired of being the one who always has to compromise while Ryan gets a free pass. So yeah, that's my current dilemma. I feel stuck between wanting to stand up for myself and not wanting to make things worse with my family. If anyone's been in a similar situation, I'd love to hear how you handled it. I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Thanks for reading. Update 1 point. Hey again, it's Alex. So, like I said in the first post, I've been trying to figure out how to handle all this mess with my family. Things were already tense, but recently, it's gone from bad to worse. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin. Last week, my mom came into my room, acting like she was just checking in on me, but I could tell something was up. She started with small talk, asking how work was going, but then quickly shifted the conversation. She said something like, "You know, Alex, since Ryan and his family are staying with us now, the household expenses have gone up a lot." I could feel where this was heading, but I didn't say anything yet. Then she hit me with it. "We're going to need you to pitch in a bit more to help cover everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, I've been paying my share, more than my share, for years. I've never once asked for a free ride or complained about my contributions. Meanwhile, Ryan and his wife aren't paying for anything, and they've practically taken over the house. So I asked her straight up, "What about Ryan? Is he going to start paying rent too?" My mom's reaction? She got annoyed and said something vague about how Ryan is in a tough spot right now and how family helps family. Then she just walked out of my room like the conversation was over. I was fuming. It's not even about the money at this point. It's the principle of it. Why am I the only one who has to step up and help the family while Ryan gets a free pass? The next day, my dad backed her up. Over breakfast, he casually mentioned that I should consider contributing more since we're all in this together. I tried to argue my case, but he cut me off before I could even finish. He just got up, said, "Think about it," and walked away. I glanced over at Ryan, hoping for some kind of support or acknowledgement, but he just looked at me and kept eating like nothing was happening. Later that night, after I got home from work, I decided I needed to confront my mom again. I told her I couldn't afford to pay more than I already was. Between tuition, bills, and saving for my future, I was stretched thin as it was. But she didn't care. She started going on about how I needed to sacrifice for the family and how Ryan has kids to take care of. Like, yeah, I get that he has kids, but he's also an adult. Why is it suddenly my job to support his family? Since then, my parents have been giving me the cold shoulder. They barely talk to me, and when they do, it's just passive-aggressive comments about how I'm not being a team player. Ryan, of course, hasn't said a word about it. He just sits back, letting me take all the heat while he continues to live rent-free. His wife hasn't been much better. She started making little remarks like, "It must be nice to have so much money saved up," or, "I wish we had the luxury of focusing on ourselves like you do." I almost laughed the first time she said that because, seriously, what luxury? I've been busting my ass to save every penny while she and Ryan contribute absolutely nothing. What really stings is how little my parents seem to care about everything I've been doing. I've been working hard, staying out of trouble, and paying my way, but none of that seems to matter to them. Meanwhile, Ryan screws up constantly, and they bend over backward to support him. It's like no matter what I do, I'll never measure up to him in their eyes. The breaking point came a few days ago. I was sitting in my room, trying to get some studying done, when my mom barged in without knocking. She dropped a toddler bed in the corner of my room and said, "We're going to set this up in here for the kids. They need more space." I was stunned. My room is the one place in this
I told
house
her no.
that's supposed to
I
be
said,
mine,
"This is
and
my
now they're
room.
trying to turn it
I'd
into
pay
a
rent for
nursery.
it."
You can't just decide to take it over. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Don't be dramatic, Alex. It's not a big deal." I stood my ground, though, and eventually she stormed out, muttering something about how selfish I was. The next day, things escalated even more. I came home from work to find Ryan's wife going through my desk drawers. When I asked her what she was doing, she just smiled and said, "Oh, I was looking for a pen." A pen? There's an entire drawer full of pens in the kitchen, but she decided to invade my personal space instead? It felt so disrespectful. But when I brought it up to Ryan, he just shrugged and said, "She didn't mean anything by it." I tried to let it go, but later that night, I overheard Ryan talking to my parents. He was saying something about how I need to be more supportive and how it's time for Alex to step up and help the family. My blood was boiling. Not only was he freeloading, but now he was trying to guilt trip me into giving up even more of my money and my space for him. That's when I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to be the good kid, thinking that if I worked hard enough, my parents would finally see my worth. But I've finally accepted that it's never going to happen. They'll always choose Ryan, no matter how much he screws up or how much I succeed. I started looking at apartments that night. It wasn't an easy decision. I don't have a ton of money, and I know moving out will make things even more strained with my family. But I can't keep living like this. I'm tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. If my parents want to put Ryan on a pedestal, fine. But they're going to have to do it without my help. So, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I'm officially done trying to please people who don't appreciate me. I haven't told my family yet, but I've started packing my things little by little. I don't know what their reaction will be when they find out, but at this point, I don't really care. I just want to get out and start living my own life. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll update you soon with what happens next. Wish me luck. Update 2.0. Hey, it's Alex again. Things have been pretty crazy since my last update, but I'm finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. After everything that's gone down with my parents and Ryan, I've made up my mind. I'm moving out. It's not going to be easy, but at this point, staying here feels impossible. So let me walk you through how I'm planning to pull this off without completely blowing up my relationship with my family. Well, not right away at least. First things first, I started looking for apartments. Let me tell you, finding a place that's affordable, close enough to work and school, and not a complete dump is harder than I thought. Most of the places I found were either way out of my budget or in neighborhoods that felt sketchy. I didn't want to rush into anything, but I also knew I couldn't stay in my parents' house much longer without losing my mind. Every day, the tension was getting worse. My mom kept dropping hints about how things are tight right now and how we all need to make sacrifices. Ryan, of course, was completely oblivious. He and his wife were busy turning the house into their personal playground, and I was just trying to stay out of their way. Eventually, a friend of a friend came through for me. They knew someone, a guy named Jake, who was looking for a roommate. Jake had just rented a small 2-bedroom apartment and needed someone to split the rent and bills. I was skeptical at first. I mean, moving in with a stranger isn't exactly ideal, but after meeting Jake and checking out the apartment, I started to feel like this might actually work. The place was nothing fancy, just a basic setup with a tiny kitchen and a shared bathroom. But it was clean, affordable, and only about a 20-minute walk from campus. The best part? Was far enough from my parents' house that I wouldn't have to deal with any surprise visits. After we talked it over, Jake agreed to let me move in. We settled on splitting everything 50-50, which would bring my share of the rent to around $400 a month, less than what I've been paying my parents. Even with bills and groceries added in, I'd still be saving money compared to what I'm dealing with now. It felt like a no-brainer. The tricky part was figuring out how to leave without creating a huge scene. I knew if I told my parents I was planning to move out, they'd do everything in their power to stop me. My mom would probably go full guilt trip mode, talking about how I was abandoning the family and how they needed me to help out. My dad would just get angry and accuse me of being ungrateful. And Ryan? He'd probably laugh it off and assume I was bluffing. So I decided to keep it a secret. Over the next couple of weeks, I started packing my stuff little by little. I didn't want to raise any red flags, so I hid most of it in the back of my closet or tucked it away in storage bins. When no one was home, I'd sneak a few things out to my car and drive them over to Jake's place. It was a slow process, but I knew it was the only way to avoid a full-blown family meltdown. During this time, I started pulling back from my family more and more. I stopped eating dinner with them, opting to grab quick meals in my room instead. I avoided any conversations about money or family responsibilities, and focused on getting through each day without losing my temper. It wasn't easy. Every time my mom made a passive-aggressive comment about how everyone needs to pitch in, or Ryan's wife left a mess in the kitchen for me to clean up, I wanted to scream, but I kept reminding myself that it wouldn't be like this for much longer. I had an end date in sight, and that kept me going. One of the hardest parts was keeping my cool around the kids. Like I've said before, I love my niece and nephew, but they've been driving me up the wall lately. They've taken over the living room, the kitchen, and even my room on some days. I can't tell you how many times I've come home from work or class to find toys scattered everywhere, sticky handprints on my desk, or crayon marks on my walls. I tried setting boundaries, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Ryan just laughed it off, and his wife acted like I was being unreasonable. "They're just kids, Alex," she'd say, like that was supposed to make everything okay. Meanwhile, I was counting down the days until I could finally have my own space again. The final straw came a few days ago when I overheard Ryan and my mom talking about my savings. I've been working my ass off for years to save up for my dream of starting a software company. It's not much yet, but it's mine, and I've been really proud of how disciplined I've been about sticking to my budget. So imagine my shock when I heard Ryan telling my mom that I should help the family by chipping in some of my savings. He actually said, Alex doesn't need all that money right now. He can start his company later. Family comes first. Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe the audacity. I confronted him about it later, and he acted like I was the selfish one for not wanting to give up my hard-earned money. We're all struggling right now, Alex, he said, like his situation was even remotely comparable to mine. I told him flat out that my savings were off limits and that he needed to start taking responsibility for his own family. He just rolled his eyes and walked away. That was it for me. I went back to my room, grabbed a box, and started packing the last of my things. I was done. I didn't care what my parents or Ryan thought anymore. I knew I deserved better than this. So now, everything is set. I've signed the lease, packed my stuff, and made plans to move out this weekend. I haven't told my parents yet. I figure it's better to rip the Band-Aid off once I'm already gone. I'll leave a note or something explaining my decision, but I'm not going to stick around for the fallout. They can deal with Ryan and his freeloading ways on their own. I know this is going to cause a lot of drama, but honestly, I don't care anymore. I need to do what's best for me, and staying in that house isn't it. I'm ready to start fresh in a place where I can actually focus on my goals without all the chaos and stress holding me back. Wish me luck, guys. I'll let you know how it all goes in the next update. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's Alex again. I finally did it. I moved out. Let me tell you, it wasn't smooth sailing, but I feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders. This whole experience has been a whirlwind of emotions. Excitement, fear, relief, but I don't regret a thing. Here's how it all went down. So, I planned my move for the weekend when I knew my parents and Ryan's family would be out of the house. They were going to some family friends' barbecue, and I figured it was the perfect opportunity to get everything done without confrontation. I spent the entire week leading up to it, packing the last of my things, making sure everything was ready to go. By the time Saturday rolled around, my car was packed to the brim, and I was ready to leave. I have to admit, it felt weird walking through the house one last time. For all the chaos and drama, it was still the place I grew up in. I stood in my room for a minute, just taking it all in. It wasn't fancy, but it had been my space for years. It felt bittersweet knowing I was leaving it behind, but I kept reminding myself why I was doing this. I needed to put myself first for once. When I got to my new place, Jake was already there to help me unload. I can't tell you how good it felt to see my stuff in an entirely new space, one that was all mine. The apartment isn't anything fancy, just a small 2-bedroom with a shared living room and kitchen, but it's quiet, clean, and most importantly, drama-free. I set up my room with my desk, bed, and a few personal touches. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first night in my new place was surreal. I didn't realize how much noise and stress I'd been living with until I was surrounded by complete silence. No kids running around, no arguments about money, no one barging into my room without knocking. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and actually got some work done for the first time in weeks. It felt amazing. Of course, the peace didn't last long. By Sunday evening, my phone was blowing up. My mom had finally noticed I wasn't home and started calling nonstop. I ignored the first few calls, but eventually I knew I had to answer. When I picked up, she didn't even give me a chance to say hello before she started yelling. Alex, where are you? Why aren't you home? We've been calling you all day. I kept my cool and calmly said, I don't live there anymore. I've moved out. You could have heard a pin drop on the other end. Then she exploded. What do you mean you've moved out? Why didn't you tell us? How could you do this to your family? She went on and on about how I was abandoning them and how they'd been counting on me to help with expenses. When I tried to explain that I'd been paying more than my fair share for years, while Ryan contributed nothing, she completely brushed it off. Ryan has kids, Alex. You don't understand what it's like to be a parent. That was the point where I knew there was no reasoning with her. I said, Mom, I've done everything I could to help, but I can't live like that anymore. If you want to support Ryan, that's your choice, but I'm not going to keep sacrificing my own life for it. Then I hung up. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing. The next day, the messages started. My mom sent me a long text about how I was being selfish and ungrateful, followed by another about how I was tearing the family apart. My dad chimed in too, saying he was disappointed in me and that I needed to grow up and understand the importance of family. Ryan even had the audacity to text me saying, Wow, way to screw over mom and dad when they need you most. Real mature. I didn't respond to any of it. I knew it wouldn't change their minds, and honestly, I was too exhausted to care. I spent the day settling into my new place, getting groceries, and organizing my room. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. A few days later, my mom called again. This time, she wasn't yelling. She sounded more desperate than angry. She started talking about how hard things had been since I left, how they were struggling to pay bills, and how Ryan's kids were upset that I wasn't around anymore. She even tried to guilt trip me by saying, "We've always supported you, Alex. Is this how you repay us?" I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I love you, but I've been supporting myself for years. I've been paying rent, working, and saving for my future, while Ryan hasn't contributed a thing. I can't keep putting my life on hold to clean up his messes. It's not fair." She didn't take it well. She started crying, saying she didn't know how they were going to manage without me. It was hard to hear, but I stood my ground. I told her I wasn't coming back, and that they needed to figure things out with Ryan. After that, she hung up, and I haven't heard from her since. Ryan, on the other hand, hasn't stopped trying to contact me. He keeps texting, asking for money, and saying I'm being selfish for not helping out. At one point, he even said, "You've always been the responsible one. Why can't you just step up and help your family?" I almost laughed when I read that. The nerve of this guy. Despite all the drama, I feel like I made the right decision. My new place is quiet, my roommate is cool, and I'm finally able to focus on my studies and work without constant distractions. It hasn't been easy cutting ties with my family, but I know it was necessary. I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness and future for people who don't appreciate me. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. Thanks to everyone who's been following my story and offering advice. It's helped more than you know. I'll probably post one final update soon to let you all know how things turn out. Final update. Hey everyone, it's Alex again, and this will probably be my last update. It's been a couple of weeks since I moved out, and honestly, I feel like a completely different person. The fallout from my decision hasn't been pretty, but it's also shown me who my family really is, and who I am when I'm not living under their constant judgment. So, let's dive into how things have been since I left. First off, my mom's reaction hasn't changed much. After her initial meltdown when I told her I was moving out, she switched into full-on guilt trip mode. The texts kept coming every single day, filled with dramatic statements like, "How could you leave us in this situation?" And, "Don't you care about your family?" At one point, she even said, "We sacrificed so much for you, Alex, and this is how you repay us?" It was hard to read those messages without feeling a pang of guilt. I mean, I do love my parents. They've done a lot for me growing up, and I'll always be grateful for that. But what they don't seem to realize is that love and gratitude don't mean letting yourself be taken advantage of. For years, I've been the one keeping things afloat while Ryan contributed nothing. I've paid my share, cleaned up their messes, and put my own needs aside time and time again. Enough is enough. I thought my dad might take a more practical approach, but nope, he's just as bad. He called me a few days after I moved out, and the conversation was exhausting, to say the least. He started off calm, asking me why I felt the need to leave without talking to them first. I explained as clearly as I could that I was tired of being treated like a second-class family member. I told him that I'd been paying rent for years, doing my part, and that it wasn't fair for them to expect me to shoulder even more of the financial burden while Ryan got a free pass. His response? "Alex, you need to understand that Ryan's in a tough spot. He's trying to get his life together, and as his brother, it's your job to support him. Family sticks together." I couldn't believe it. I said, "Dad, Ryan's been in a tough spot his entire life because you and Mom never hold him accountable for anything. I'm done cleaning up his messes. If you want to keep enabling him, that's your choice. But I'm not going to be part of it anymore." That didn't go over well. He accused me of being selfish, of abandoning the family, and even of turning my back on Ryan's kids. That one hurt the most because I do care about my niece and nephew. They're just kids, and none of this is their fault. But it's not my job to sacrifice my future for them, especially when their own parents refuse to step up. Speaking of Ryan, he's been blowing up my phone too. His messages are a mix of guilt-tripping and outright demands. One minute he's saying, "I can't believe you'd leave Mom and Dad in the lurch like this." And the next, he's asking for money to help get back on his feet. At one point, he even sent me this long message about how I've always been the responsible one, and how it's my duty to help him out because that's what family does. I didn't respond to any of it. Honestly, what's the point? Ryan has spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, and I'm not going to be the one to bail him out again. If he wants to turn his life around, great. But he's going to have to do it without my help. On the flip side, life in my new apartment has been amazing. It's small, sure, but it's quiet and peaceful, and I finally feel like I have space to breathe. Jake, my roommate, has been super chill. We split the bills and groceries evenly, And there's no drama, no guilt.
I should have known something was off the moment I stepped through the front door. The living room was in disarray, couch cushions tossed carelessly aside, and the contents of the bookshelf strewn across the floor. A cold dread washed over me as I rushed upstairs to my bedroom. The sight that greeted me made my heart sink. Drawers hung open, clothes spilling out haphazardly. My jewelry box lay overturned on the dresser, its contents scattered like a kaleidoscope of broken dreams. "Paul!" I shouted, my voice trembling with panic. "Get up here now!" Moments later, my husband appeared in the doorway, his expression unnervingly calm. "What's going on?" I gestured wildly at the chaos surrounding us. "What does it look like? We've been robbed." Paul surveyed the scene with an infuriatingly casual demeanor. "Are you sure? Maybe you just misplaced some things." Anger flared within me as I knelt beside the jumbled mess of jewelry. My fingers frantically sifted through the tangle of chains and pendants, but the one item I desperately sought remained elusive. "It's gone," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. My grandmother's necklace is gone. The vintage diamond piece had been a cherished heirloom passed down through generations. More than mere jewels, it embodied the love and resilience of the remarkable woman who had raised me. Paul's voice cut through my anguish. "I'm sure it's around here somewhere. Don't worry, we'll find it." I whirled on him, disbelief and anger contorting my features. "How can you be so calm about this? That necklace is priceless to me." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Kristen, getting upset won't solve anything. Let's just retrace our steps and look for it calmly." But I knew, deep down, that the necklace wasn't simply misplaced. Someone had taken it, stolen a piece of my family's legacy right from under our noses. And as the sickening realization set in, a single name echoed through my mind, one I desperately hoped wasn't behind this violation. Janice. That necklace meant everything to me. More than just diamonds and gold, it was a connection to the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own. After my parents died in that terrible car accident when I was 8 years old, it was Grandma Rose who took me in and gave me a real home. While other kids my age were playing make-believe, I was learning how to cook, clean, and fend for myself. Grandma never coddled me, but she loved me fiercely in her own way. "Life ain't always pretty, baby girl," she'd say in her thick southern drawl. "But if you got grit and grace, you can make it through any storm." Those words became my mantra, a lifeline I clung to during the darkest days. Because even when the bills piled up and the fridge ran empty, Grandma Rose never lost her unshakable spirit. She worked tirelessly as a seamstress, her calloused fingers deftly guiding the needle and thread. I can still picture her hunched over that old Singer sewing machine, the whirring rhythmic as she brought fabric to life. It was during those long nights, as I drifted off to the comforting hum of the machine, that Grandma would tell me about the necklace. "This here's been in our family for generations," she'd say, her weathered hands cradling the glittering gems. "Passed down from mother to daughter as a reminder of our strength and resilience." To Grandma, those diamonds represented more than just wealth. They were a testament to the sacrifices and perseverance of the women who came before us. With each delicate link in the chain, she wove the tales of our ancestors' triumphs and struggles, binding me to a legacy of unbreakable spirit. "One day this'll be yours, baby girl," Grandma would whisper, "a piece of our history to carry with you always." Those words echoed through my mind as I knelt amid the wreckage of my bedroom, the vacant space where the necklace once rested mocking me. Grandma had trusted me to safeguard our family's heirloom, and I had failed her. "We have to call the police," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and determination. Paul shook his head, his brow furrowed with concern. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Kristen. For all we know, you just misplaced it somewhere." I fixed him with a steely glare, my hands balling into fists at my sides. How could he be so blasé about this? Didn't he understand the profound significance of what had been taken? "You think I'd just carelessly lose something that important?" I snapped. "No, Paul. Someone took it. Someone who knew exactly what that necklace meant to me." As the terrible realization settled over me, a singular name burned like acid on my tongue. The one person I knew was capable of such a heartless act, the one who had always resented my bond with Grandma Rose. Janice. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that Janice's love comes with a steep price, and I was never willing to pay it. From the moment Paul and I started dating, his mother made it abundantly clear that I would never be good enough in her eyes. "A girl with no family and no money?" she'd sneer, her thin lips curling into a disdainful sneer. "Is that really the best you can do, Paul?" Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. I had survived far worse than a disapproving mother-in-law, even one as venomous as Janice. Unfortunately, Paul was never able to break free from her toxic grip. Despite my pleading, he remained her obedient little boy, jumping at her every whim and demand. "She's just looking out for me," he'd insist, his eyes downcast with shame. "You know how worried she gets." I knew better than to argue. Janice had him wrapped around her bony finger, and any attempt to sever that twisted bond would only push him further into her clutches. So I suffered in silence, enduring her endless criticisms and backhanded insults. I was too messy, too loud, too opinionated, a constant disappointment in her eyes. But it was the underhanded digs at my humble upbringing that cut deepest of all. "I still can't believe Paul married a girl raised by some old seamstress," she'd sneer, her gaze boring into me with undisguised disdain. "He deserves so much better than that." It took every ounce of willpower not to slap that smug expression right off her face. How dare she disrespect the woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at life? Grandma Rose was worth 1,000 of Janice, a true pillar of strength and grace in the face of adversity. While Janice wallowed in her wealth and privilege, Grandma had clawed her way out of poverty with nothing but her calloused hands and an indomitable spirit. The necklace had been her final gift to me, a symbolic passing of the torch from one strong woman to another. And now, thanks to Janice's greed and pettiness, that precious heirloom was gone forever. I could feel the anger simmering within me, a white-hot rage that threatened to boil over. Paul might have been content to let his mother trample all over our lives, but I refused to be her doormat any longer. "We're calling the police," I stated firmly, leaving no room for argument. "And if you won't stand up to your mother, then I'll handle this myself." Paul's eyes widened in alarm, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Kristen, you can't be serious. It's just a necklace, for God's sake. Just a necklace." How could he be so callous, so dismissive of something that meant the world to me? "It's more than just a necklace, Paul," I said, my voice low and trembling with barely restrained fury. "It's my heritage, my connection to the woman who made me who I am today. And if you can't see that, if you're willing to let your mother stomp all over that, then maybe we have bigger problems than a missing piece of jewelry." As the words left my lips, I realized they carried a weight far beyond this single act of betrayal. This was about taking a stand, about refusing to let Janice's toxicity poison our lives any longer. If Paul wouldn't fight for me, for us, then I would have to fight for myself. I should have known better than to hope for a moment's peace. Not when Janice was involved. The woman had a sixth sense for sniffing out drama, and my confrontation with Paul must have set off her internal chaos detector. Less than 24 hours after our heated argument, the doorbell rang with that all-too-familiar cadence. 3 sharp trills like a queen announcing her arrival. "I'll get it," Paul called out, his voice laced with a mixture of resignation and dread. But I was already making my way to the front door, steeling myself for the inevitable storm that was about to blow through our home. Sure enough, when I pulled it open, there she stood, Janice in all her designer-clad glory. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" she demanded, brushing past me without waiting for a response. I bit back the acidic retort that danced on the tip of my tongue. Engaging with Janice was like fanning the flames of a wildfire. The more oxygen you gave her, the more she burned. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I asked instead, my voice taut with forced politeness. Janice made a show of looking around the living room, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "Good Lord, Kristen, this place is a sty. Haven't you heard of dusting?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Paul cut me off with a nervous chuckle. Now, Mother, you know Kristen works hard to keep everything tidy." "Clearly not hard enough," Janice sniffed, casting a disdainful glance in my direction. The urge to throttle her was becoming overwhelming, but I managed a tight smile. "I'll get us some coffee." As I retreated to the kitchen, I could hear Janice's shrill voice carrying through the house. Honestly, Paul, I don't know how you put up with her. You could do so much better, you know? My hands trembled with barely restrained rage as I fumbled with the coffee mugs. How dare she speak about me like that, as if I were some sort of burden to be endured? By the time I returned to the living room, Janice had made herself quite at home, her bony frame perched on the edge of the sofa like a vulture surveying its prey. Paul sat in the armchair across from her, his shoulders hunched and his gaze averted. "There you are," Janice said, fixing me with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "I was just telling Paul how lovely it would be if we could have a proper family dinner this weekend. You know, a chance for us to catch up and spend some quality time together." The words oozed from her mouth like poisoned honey, and I felt my stomach churn with dread. A family dinner with Janice was akin to a medieval torture session, 2 hours of endless needling and criticism, all while forcing hollow smiles. "That sounds lovely," I lied through gritted teeth, setting the coffee tray down with more force than intended. Janice's gaze drifted to the disarray of my jewelry box, still scattered across the dresser top. "Good heavens, Kristen, what happened here? It looks like a tornado blew through." A familiar prickle of unease crept up my spine as her beady eyes raked over the jumbled mess of chains and pendants. Surely she couldn't know, could she? "Actually, we think we were robbed yesterday," Paul piped up, shooting me a nervous glance. "Some things went missing, including that tacky old necklace of Kristen's," Janice interjected with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The one from her grandmother, right?" The casual way she spoke of the necklace, as if it were little more than a worthless bauble, sent a spike of white-hot fury through my veins. "You know about the missing necklace?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Janice met my gaze with an infuriatingly bland expression. "Of course, dear. Paul mentioned it when I arrived." But her eyes, those soulless pits, betrayed something else entirely. A flicker of smugness, of twisted satisfaction at my pain. In that moment, I knew the truth with every fiber of my being. The necklace hadn't been taken by some random thief. It had been stolen by the very woman sitting before me, the one who had always resented and envied my bond with Grandma Rose. You. The word caught in my throat, rage and disbelief rendering me momentarily speechless. Janice merely arched one perfectly groomed eyebrow, her thin lips curving into a serpentine smile. "Me?" she purred, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Why, Kristen? Whatever do you mean?" The silence that followed Janice's thinly veiled taunt was deafening, a vacuum of tension that threatened to swallow us whole. I could feel Paul's worried gaze boring into me, silently pleading for me to let it go, to keep the peace. But how could I? How could I possibly sit idly by while this vile woman not only stole from me, but mocked me to my face? "You know exactly what I mean," I growled, my fingers curling into white-knuckled fists at my sides. "That necklace was priceless to me, and you took it out of pure spite." Janice's eyes widened in a parody of innocence, her perfectly manicured hand fluttering to her chest. "Why, Kristen, I'm absolutely appalled that you would accuse me of such a thing. I may have my faults, but theft? Really, dear, you're being quite dramatic." The sickly sweet condescension in her tone was like acid on an open wound. I wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug, self-satisfied smirk off her face once and for all. "Don't play dumb with me, Janice," I spat, taking a step closer to her perch on the sofa. "We both know you've had it out for me from the start. That necklace was my connection to Grandma Rose, and you couldn't stand the fact that she loved me more than you." A flicker of something dark and ugly passed over Janice's features, her carefully cultivated mask of gentility slipping for the briefest of moments. Ah, there it was, the jealousy and resentment that had festered like an open wound for all these years. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a low venomous rasp. "That old crone may have doted on you, but she was nothing more than a common seamstress, certainly not the kind of influence a young woman of means should have in her life." "Mother, please." Paul's timid voice cut through the tension, but I barely heard him. All I could focus on was the white-hot rage coursing through my veins, the urge to lash out and make Janice pay for her cruelty. How dare she speak of Grandma Rose with such disrespect? The woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at life, who had instilled in me the values of strength and resilience that her own daughter so sorely lacked. "You're wrong," I said, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "Grandma Rose was worth 1,000 of you. She may not have had money or status, but she had integrity and heart. 2 things you'll never understand, you miserable, spiteful hag." The words tumbled from my lips in a torrent of pent-up rage, each one a dagger aimed at the heart of Janice's fragile ego. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of something akin to hurt flash across her features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that infuriatingly smug sneer. "Well, well," she clucked, shaking her head in mock disappointment. Such language from the woman who claims to have been raised with manners and grace, although I suppose we can't expect much from someone of your background. The thinly veiled dig at my humble upbringing was the final straw. I opened my mouth to unleash a fresh volley of vitriol, but Paul's voice cut through the haze of fury like a bucket of ice water. "Enough," he shouted, surging to his feet and planting himself between Janice and me. "I won't have the 2 of you going at each other like this, not in my own home." I recoiled as if he had struck me, stunned by the rare display of backbone from my typically docile husband. For once, the mask of the obedient son had slipped, revealing a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. Strong, decisive, and unwilling to be cowed by his mother's manipulations. But as quickly as that spark of defiance had ignited, it faded, extinguished by the weight of years of conditioning and emotional subjugation. "Mother's right," he said, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "This has gone too far. The necklace is just a material possession, and accusing her of stealing it is unacceptable." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my tongue as I watched him turn to face Janice, his expression a mask of shame and contrition. "I'm so sorry you had to endure such disrespect, Mother," he murmured, his voice thick with remorse. "It won't happen again, I promise." As he wrapped his arm around her bony shoulders in a gesture of misguided filial devotion, I felt something inside me shatter. In that moment, I realized with gut-wrenching clarity that Paul would never truly be on my side, not when it came to his mother. No matter how much she belittled me, no matter how far she took her cruelty, he would always choose her in the end. And as I watched them embrace, united in their twisted, toxic bond, I knew that if I wanted justice for what Janice had done, I would have to take matters into my own hands. The drive up to the lake house should have been a peaceful respite, a chance to escape the suffocating tension that had engulfed our home. But as Paul and I navigated the winding roads in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hung heavy in the air between us. It had been 3 days since my explosive confrontation with Janice, 3 days of simmering resentment and bitter silence. Paul had made it abundantly clear where his loyalties lay, choosing to bury his head in the sand rather than acknowledge his mother's despicable actions. As for me, I was done playing the role of the dutiful, long-suffering wife. Grandma Rose hadn't raised me to be a doormat, and I refused to let Janice trample all over her legacy any longer. The proof I needed had arrived in the form of a nondescript envelope, slipped unceremoniously through the mail slot 2 days ago. Inside was a single piece of paper, a pawn shop receipt detailing the sale of a vintage diamond necklace, the very one that had been stolen from my home. I had pored over the document obsessively, my fingers tracing the damning evidence of Janice's betrayal. The date, the description, even the listed seller's name. It all added up to an undeniable truth that Paul refused to accept. His mother was a thief, a vindictive snake, who would stop at nothing to hurt me, to sever my connection to the woman she had always envied and resented. But this time, I wouldn't let her win. This time I would make her pay. The plan had been forming in my mind for days, a slow burn of righteous fury and calculated revenge. And as we pulled up to the secluded lake house, the final pieces clicked into place. "Isn't this nice?" Paul ventured, his voice tentative as he killed the engine. A whole weekend away, just the 2 of us. I forced a tight smile, willing my features into a mask of forced calm. "Yes, it'll be wonderful to get away from everything." His brow furrowed slightly at my pointed emphasis, but he didn't press the issue. Typical Paul, always eager to avoid confrontation, even when it was long overdue. We unpacked in silence, the tension between us a living, breathing thing. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, I made my move. "I'm going to take a walk down by the water," I announced, already heading for the door. "Clear my head a bit." Paul hesitated, his mouth opening as if to protest, but I was already gone, the screen door slamming shut behind me. The pawn shop was a hole-in-the-wall establishment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that dealt in discretion as much as merchandise. Perfect for someone like Janice, who valued her reputation above all else. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside, and a wiry man with beady eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he drawled, his gaze raking over me with poorly veiled suspicion. I steeled my nerves and met his stare head-on, reaching into my pocket for the crumpled receipt. "I'm looking for a necklace that was sold here recently," I said, sliding the paper across the glass countertop. "A vintage diamond piece, according to this receipt." The man's eyes narrowed as he scanned the document, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment I feared he would refuse to cooperate, that my carefully laid plans would unravel before they could even begin. But then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah, I remember this one," he grunted, disappearing into the back room. My heart thundered in my chest as I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally he reappeared, a velvet pouch clutched in his gnarled hand. "Here it is," he said gruffly, upending the pouch onto the counter. There it was, Grandma Rose's necklace, the delicate chains and glittering diamonds that had been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. A piece of my heritage, my connection to the woman who had made me who I was. And it had taken everything in me not to snatch it up right then and there, to clutch it to my chest and never let it go again. But I couldn't, not yet. Not until I had made Janice pay for what she had done. "I'll take it," I said, my voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions swirling within me. The pawnbroker eyed me warily, no doubt sensing the barely contained fury simmering beneath my calm exterior. "You sure about that, lady?" he asked, his gaze flickering to the receipt once more. "'Cause according to this, that necklace don't belong to you." I leaned forward, holding his gaze with every ounce of steely determination I possessed. "It belongs to me," I said, each word dripping with conviction. "And I'll do whatever it takes to get it back." The drive back to the lake house was a blur, my mind whirling with the weight of what I had just done. The necklace burned a hole in my pocket, a constant reminder of the line I was about to cross, and just how far I was willing to go to make Janice pay. Paul was already asleep when I slipped back inside, his soft snores drifting from the bedroom. Good, the fewer questions the better. I needed him as far removed from this as possible, both for his own sake and mine. With trembling hands, I retrieved the velvet pouch from my jacket and carefully upended it onto the kitchen counter. There it was, the diamonds winking at me in the dim light, a silent taunt, daring me to go through with my plan. I traced the delicate links with the pad of my finger, steeling my resolve. This was about more than just a piece of jewelry. It was about righting a wrong, about standing up to the toxic force that had plagued my life for far too long. Janice had started this game, and now it was time for me to finish it, on my terms. The rest of the night passed in a flurry of activity, each meticulous step etched into my memory with razor-sharp clarity. The supplies gathered, the plan set in motion, every contingency accounted for. By the time the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, I was ready. The drive into town was a silent one, the radio purposefully muted as I navigated the deserted streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, my heart thundering in my ears like a caged animal desperate to be set free. Finally, I pulled up to the familiar suburban house, its manicured lawn and pristine exterior a carefully cultivated facade, just like the woman who dwelled within. I killed the engine and sat in silence for a long moment, watching as the curtains in the upstairs window twitched ever so slightly. She was awake, no doubt already planning her next round of manipulations and petty cruelties. Well, not today. With a deep, steadying breath, I slipped from the car and made my way up the immaculate path to the front door. The necklace was a reassuring weight in my pocket, a talisman of sorts, a reminder of why I was here, of the justice I sought. The doorbell echoed through the cavernous foyer like a death knell, and I could practically feel Janice's confusion and disdain radiating from the other side of the door. Who in the world? Her shrill voice carried, growing closer with each clipped footfall. The moment stretched into an eternity as the lock clicked and the door swung open, revealing Janice in all her silk-robed glory. Her perfectly coiffed hair was mussed, her face devoid of makeup, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that would soon be shattered. "Kristen," she sneered, her brow furrowing in distaste. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour? And without Paul, no less?" I said nothing, merely reached into my pocket and withdrew the necklace, letting the delicate chains pool in my upturned palm. Janice's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. For a fleeting moment, I saw the mask slip, revealing the petty, grasping creature that lurked beneath. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her gaze darting furtively left and right, as if afraid someone might overhear. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face as I drank in her discomfort, her sudden loss of control. "From the pawn shop," I said, my voice low and laced with triumph. "The same one you sold it to after you stole it from my home." Janice recoiled as if I had struck her, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth in a parody of shock. "I did no such thing," she sputtered, her eyes wide and wild. "How dare you accuse me?" "Save it, Janice," I cut her off, taking a step closer. "I have proof. The receipt, the dates, it all lines up. You took the one thing that meant everything to me out of pure spite and jealousy." For a moment, she seemed to waver, her bravado cracking under the weight of my accusations. But then, like a switch being flipped, that familiar mask of haughty disdain slammed back into place. "Well, well," she sneered, tossing her head with a derisive sniff. "It seems someone has developed quite the flair for the dramatic. Tell me, Kristen, did your darling grandmother teach you those theatrics? Or did you simply inherit her penchant for making a spectacle of yourself?" The barb hit its mark, a white-hot flare of rage licking at my insides. How dare she drag Grandma Rose into this, using her memory as a weapon against me? But I refused to take the bait, to let her goad me into an emotional outburst that would only feed her twisted sense of superiority. Instead, I simply smiled, a slow, predatory curl of the lips that made Janice's eyes narrow with sudden uncertainty. "You're right, Janice," I purred, taking another deliberate step forward. "I did inherit something from my grandmother." I was close enough now to see the flicker of unease in her gaze, the slightest chink in her armor of smug self-assurance. "Her strength," I continued, my voice a low, dangerous rasp. "Her resilience. Her refusal to let petty, vindictive people like you grind her down." Janice opened her mouth, no doubt, to deliver a scathing retort, but I didn't give her the chance. In one fluid motion, I reached out and grabbed a fistful of her silk robe, yanking her forward with a strength that belied my slight frame. "So you can keep your money, your status, your pathetic delusions of grandeur," I hissed, our faces mere inches apart. "Because at the end of the day, I have something far more valuable, the knowledge that I am a better woman than you could ever hope to be." With that, I released her, letting her stagger back in a flurry of ruffled silk and indignant sputtering. But I was already turning away, the necklace clutched in my hand like a victor's spoils. As I strode back down the path toward my car, Janice's outraged shrieks followed me like a bitter requiem. "You'll regret this, Kristen. Do you hear me? You haven't seen the last of me." But her threats fell on deaf ears. Because in that moment, as the morning sun crested over the rooftops and bathed me in its warm glow, I knew that I had already won. Janice might have money and status, but I had something far more precious. The strength of my convictions, the knowledge that I had stood up for what was right. And as the necklace glittered in the light, a piece of my heritage restored, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The calm that comes with knowing you have honored the legacy of those who came before. Grandma Rose would have been proud. The aftermath of my confrontation with Janice was like a whirlwind, a maelstrom of emotions and consequences that threatened to sweep me away. As I pulled up to the lake house, necklace clutched tightly in my trembling hand, a part of me half expected Paul to be waiting on the porch, suitcase in hand, and recriminations on his lips. But when I stepped through the door, the living room was empty, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had decided to take my side for once. That illusion was swiftly shattered by the sound of his voice drifting in from the kitchen. Absolutely unacceptable, Mother. I don't care what she said or did. That kind of behavior is inexcusable. My heart sank as I rounded the corner to find him pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. Of course he was talking to Janice, no doubt being regaled with her twisted version of events. Paul's eyes went wide when he saw me, his mouth snapping shut with an audible click. "I have to go," he muttered into the receiver, never taking his gaze off me. "We'll discuss this later." The heavy silence that followed was suffocating, a palpable weight that threatened to crush us both. I could see the questions swirling in Paul's eyes, the desperate need for an explanation warring with his deeply ingrained instinct to avoid confrontation. Finally, he spoke. What happened? Such a simple question, and yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. I could have lied, could have downplayed the events of the morning and tried to smooth things over. But I was done with lies, done with tiptoeing around Janice's fragile ego and toxic manipulations. "I got the necklace back," I said simply, holding it up for him to see, "from the pawn shop where your mother sold it after she stole it from our home." Paul's brow furrowed, his mouth working soundlessly for a moment as he processed my words. That's not possible," he finally managed, shaking his head vehemently. "Mother would never do something like that. She's not a thief, Kristen." The blind devotion in his voice, the utter refusal to even entertain the possibility that his precious mother could be anything less than perfect, was like a physical blow. "Open your eyes, Paul," I exploded, unable to contain my frustration any longer. "I have proof, the receipt, the dates, everything. She took that necklace out of pure spite because she knew how much it meant to me." "No," Paul whispered, his face ashen. "No, you're wrong. You have to be." In that moment, I realized that no amount of evidence would ever be enough to sway him. Janice had him so thoroughly brainwashed, so twisted up in her web of lies and manipulation, that he would always take her side, no matter how despicable her actions. And as that painful truth sank in, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Because for the first time I saw Paul for what he truly was, a weak, spineless man so crippled by his mother's toxicity that he would never be able to fully commit to me, to our marriage. "You know what?" I said, my voice low and laced with resignation. "Believe what you want, Paul. But I'm done walking on eggshells around your mother. I'm done letting her treat me like garbage and disrespect everything I hold dear." I took a step closer, holding his gaze with every ounce of steely determination I possessed. "This necklace represents more than just diamonds and gold. It's a symbol of the strength and resilience that Grandma Rose instilled in me. The same strength that let me stand up to your mother and take back what was rightfully mine." Paul opened his mouth, no doubt to protest or make excuses, but I didn't give him the chance. "So you can keep making apologies for her, keep turning a blind eye to her cruelty and pettiness, but I refuse to be a part of that toxic cycle any longer. Not when it means sacrificing my self-respect and the legacy my grandmother fought so hard to give me." The words hung heavy in the air, a gauntlet thrown down between us. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of my ultimatum stretching out in the silence. Finally, Paul's shoulders slumped in defeat, and I saw the flicker of the man I had once loved extinguish in his eyes. "If that's how you really feel," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I said nothing, merely turned and headed for the door, the necklace clutched tightly in my fist. As I stepped out onto the porch, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. Paul was still standing in the kitchen, his back to me and his head bowed in resignation. A part of me ached to go to him, to find a way to make things right, but I knew deep down that it was too late for that. The ties that bound him to his mother were too strong, too deeply ingrained to ever be severed. So I did the only thing I could. I kept walking, letting the screen door slam shut behind me with a finality that reverberated in my soul. As I made my way to the car, the morning sun glinting off the diamonds in my hand, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace amidst the turmoil. Because for the first time in my life, I was truly free, free from Janice's toxic grip, free from the burden of trying to please a woman who would never be satisfied. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure, but as I clutched the necklace to my chest, I knew that Grandma Rose would have understood. She too had walked away from situations that threatened to diminish her spirit, her sense of self-worth. And in that moment, as I turned to face an uncertain future, I knew that her strength, her resilience, flowed through my veins like a wellspring of courage and determination. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, unbowed and unbroken. Because that was the legacy she had passed down to me. A legacy far more precious than any diamond or jewel. A legacy of grace under fire, of dignity in the face of adversity. And for the first time in far too long, I felt truly worthy of carrying that mantle.
I'm Clara, a 35-year-old housewife, married to Leo for 10 years. He works for a trading company, and we have a daughter in elementary school. With Leo traveling a lot for work, it was challenging when our daughter was younger. But he always made time for video calls, and she adored him. Despite his absences, I never felt lonely. We were a happy, close-knit family. However, things weren't always perfect. I had a friend, Jane, who turned hostile toward me. We lived in the same apartment building. Our kids went to the same kindergarten, and we were on the PTA together. For years, we were close, but something changed. She began harassing me. I tried to fix things between us, but her behavior only got worse. The trouble started when we bought a house. We had been living in the same rental complex as Jane, but when our daughter started school, we moved into a new single-family home. It was a big decision, but it felt right. The house was in a great location, near a supermarket and the station, with a big yard for our daughter to play in. I was so grateful to Leo for his hard work, and I focused even more on taking care of our home and family. Jane didn't like our new situation. She grew cold after we moved. At first, I didn't understand why. We used to visit each other's homes often, but suddenly she started ignoring me and even glaring at me with contempt. It all became clear during our children's school entrance ceremony. Afterward, as we were leaving, she whispered in my ear, "You think you're better than everyone else just because you bought a house. I'm disappointed in you." Then she walked away. I was shocked. I never bragged about our new home and still wanted to be friends, even after our kids started school. I tried to mend our relationship, but she wouldn't budge. Instead, she spread false rumors, claiming I had become arrogant after buying the house. Luckily, no one believed her, and some friends even sympathized with me. Though others were supportive, I constantly worried about what Jane might do next. Fortunately, our children never ended up in the same class, and eventually, Jane stopped bothering me. By the time my daughter reached 3rd grade, I had put the whole ordeal behind me. Life was peaceful again, or so I thought. I had underestimated Jane's persistence. One morning, after sending my daughter to school, the doorbell rang. I answered the intercom and saw 2 police officers standing outside. A police car was parked in front of the house. My heart raced, but I tried to stay calm, thinking they might be here about something in the neighborhood. I told myself, it's okay, and slowly opened the door. One of the officers asked, "Is your husband at home?" They weren't here for me, but for Leo. I began to explain that he wasn't home, but then the officer's next words nearly stopped my heart. "Your husband is suspected of molestation." I gasped, covering my mouth with both hands. The thought of the neighbors finding out was terrifying. The police explained that a woman had accused him of inappropriate behavior on a train. I knew Leo could never do such a thing and insisted they had made a mistake. But the officer warned, "If you hide him, you'll be arrested too." I was stunned, knowing Leo was innocent, when Jane suddenly appeared behind the officers, smirking. At first, I thought she was just being nosy, but she wasn't. Ignoring the officers, she barged into my house and said, "If you don't want him arrested, I might consider settling for some compensation money." Jane was the one who reported my husband. The officers seemed uneasy with her talk of a settlement, but she continued, I was really scared, and began describing the incident with a pained expression. She claimed she was on a train when someone suddenly touched her. She almost screamed, but then recognized the face. It was my husband. She hesitated to turn him in because he was her friend's husband. Before she could decide, he vanished into the crowd at the next station, so she decided to report it to the police later. With tearful eyes, she pointed at me, saying, Molestation is a serious crime, officer. Arrest her too. If she had truly been assaulted, her fear and determination to catch the culprit would be understandable. And if I were hiding the criminal, I could be just as guilty. But this situation was different. My husband couldn't have committed the crime. How could she fabricate such a story and act so convincingly? I resolved to expose her lies completely. Time to get serious. I wasn't going to hold back. I'm sorry to trouble you by coming all the way here, I told the officers. But my husband has been overseas on assignment for 3 years. Overseas? The officers looked shocked. Yes, he had been out of the country for 3 long years. Just after we moved into our new home, his company sent him abroad. When he first told me, I felt like my world was falling apart. It's not unusual to hear about people being transferred right after buying a house, but his assignment was overseas. And it wasn't to a place we could easily visit. This time, it was a long-term assignment, not just a brief business trip. Although I was used to his frequent travels, I was deeply disappointed because our dream home was just completed. But we couldn't refuse the company's orders. I considered moving overseas with him, but our daughter had just started school and made close friends in the neighborhood. She wanted to stay and go to school with her friends, so I decided to stay here with her. So, as soon as we moved into our new house, it was just the 2 of us. At first, living alone in a big house was unsettling, but we stayed in touch with video calls almost every day. The spacious new home allowed me to enjoy my gardening hobby, so I wasn't as lonely as I expected. That's why my husband has never lived in our new home. He's been overseas for 3 years. There's no way he could have committed any crime on a domestic train. When I explained this, the police officers looked confused and started to question everything. The one most taken aback was Jane. That's a lie. It must be a lie that your husband is overseas. I saw him with my own eyes. The culprit is definitely your husband, she shouted, her face flushed with anger. I was furious that she still accused my husband of groping, but proving his innocence was my priority with the police involved. I kept my composure and said, should I call my husband right now? I pulled out my phone from my apron pocket. I knew he might be busy, but it was nighttime where he was, right around the end of his workday. The police officers seemed uneasy, and she looked tense, but I dialed his number anyway, silently hoping he would pick up. Thankfully, he answered immediately. Seeing his face on the screen brought me a wave of relief. I quickly explained everything, the accusation, and how she claimed he had groped her on a train. He was puzzled at first, but as I told him more and he noticed the police, he quickly grasped the situation. Calmly, he addressed the officers. As you can see, I'm not even in the country, so I couldn't have done this. He then turned the camera to show the view outside his window. The screen showed an exotic city under a dark sky, clearly somewhere abroad. There was no mistaking it. He added, if you need proof, I can show you my passport. I've been overseas for 3 years. He retrieved his passport from a nearby bag, showing the stamped pages as evidence. If you still have doubts, feel free to investigate further, he offered. One of the officers, now looking apologetic, said, no, that's not necessary. Thank you for your cooperation. After I ended the call, the officer turned to her with a stern expression. What's going on here? She was already pale, her eyes wide with shock. But I didn't know he was overseas. I was sure it was him. She stammered, her voice shaky. It was as good as a confession. I stepped closer, my voice firm. Then why did you think it was my husband? You said you saw him clearly. Was it just a mistake? She snapped, her voice rising. It's all your fault, she yelled, even as the officers watched in disbelief. You bought that house and started acting like you were better than everyone. We were supposed to be apartment buddies, but you betrayed me. I wanted to make you pay, so I framed your husband. She was ranting, her anger spilling out uncontrollably. Her selfish words left both me and the officer in shock. She held a grudge because I'd bought a house, and she tried to frame my husband for groping to get settlement money. This was far beyond simple harassment. Thankfully, since he was abroad, we avoided a false accusation. But if he had been in the country and on that train, it could have been catastrophic. I've heard that once accused of groping, proving innocence is incredibly difficult. False accusations like this are unforgivable. Yet she didn't grasp the seriousness of her actions. Despite her rage, she suddenly switched to a casual tone and said, "Well, let's just call it a mistake. I only wanted to teach a cheeky woman a lesson." I was furious at her blight and lack of remorse. "We'll see who gets punished," I replied. "What did you say?" she shrieked, lunging at me again, but the police officers restrained her and took her away. A while later, her husband came to apologize. He told me that she was arrested for making a false accusation and received a suspended sentence. He had been worried about her bad-mouthing me, but never thought she would go so far as to falsely accuse my husband. He was deeply shaken. With tears in his eyes, he apologized over and over. He also informed me that he would be divorcing her. She had constantly nagged him to earn more and complained about their apartment. This incident was the final straw for him. Now she was completely alone, with no job history and a criminal record. She would struggle to make it in society, but that was the result of her own choices. I did worry about her child, but I later learned that the child was now living with the grandparents and happily attending school. That was a relief. As for me, nearly having my husband framed by a jealous friend was a close call. Recently, he told me he might return home soon. My daughter and I are eagerly awaiting his return, and we plan to continue living happily in our beloved home. Goodbye, everyone.
Bradley, what is this? Again? You're not listening to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Bradley barely glanced up from his phone. Why should I? You're not my mom. I don't have to listen to you. His words stung, but I forced myself to stay steady. I had been married to Sean for 4 years now, and dealing with Bradley's rebellion had become a daily struggle. Sean's mother, Carol, standing in the doorway, watched the exchange without a word, her expression one of mild amusement. Bradley, this isn't about me being your mom. It's about respect, I said, my patience wearing thin. Whatever, he muttered, grabbing his backpack and heading for the door. I sighed and turned to Carol. Can you please help me with him, Carol? He needs boundaries. He's a teenager, Valerie, Carol said dismissively. You need to give him some space. Bradley slammed the door on his way out, and I flinched. Carol looked at me like I was the one at fault. Every day felt like a battle, and I was losing. Later, Sean walked in from work, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter. Hey, Val, what's for dinner? I sighed. I was thinking of leftovers, Sean. We need to start saving money. Bradley's demands and Carol's shopping are getting out of hand. Sean frowned. Val, we've been over this. They're my family. We can't just change how things are overnight. No, I said, my voice rising despite myself. But we have to start somewhere. I can't keep doing this alone. You're overreacting. Stop worrying so much. We'll manage, Sean said dismissively. I turned away, frustrated. I felt more like a maid than part of this family, juggling the household finances and trying to make ends meet. Even with my job, covering the endless expenses was impossible when no one else seemed to care. That evening, I found Carol reclining in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags. Did you go shopping again? I asked, unable to hide the irritation in my voice. Carol looked up, unbothered. Just a few things. Bradley needed new shoes, and I saw a nice jacket for him. Carol, we can't afford this. We're already struggling to pay the bills, I said. We'll be fine, Valerie. Don't be so dramatic, she replied. As I tried to argue, Sean stepped in. What's the problem now? We can't keep spending like this, Sean. It's not sustainable. He looked tired. You're always making a big deal out of everything. Just let it go. I felt a wave of anger and helplessness wash over me. How could they not see what was happening? The next morning, I tried speaking to Bradley again before he left for school. Bradley, we need to talk about your attitude and spending habits. Leave me alone, he said, pushing past me. The door slammed shut again. In the quiet of the house, I sat down, feeling the weight of it all pressing on me. If something didn't change soon, I would break. As I looked around the house, filled with things we didn't need and couldn't afford, a sinking realization set in. I was invisible here, and my words fell on deaf ears. I stood up and walked to the little home office where I kept the bills. It was time to stop talking and start doing something about this mess. The next morning, as I placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Bradley, he gave me a disdainful look. I'm not eating that, he said, pushing the plate away. It's perfectly good food, Bradley. We can't afford to be wasteful, I replied, trying to stay calm. I'm not eating leftovers, he snapped. Why can't we ever have something fresh? Just then, Carol walked into the kitchen. Bradley, darling, you don't have to eat that if you don't want to. We can go out for breakfast, she said, putting a hand on his shoulder. Carol, we can't keep spending money like this, I said firmly. We need to be more responsible. She dismissed my concerns with a wave. You worry too much, Valerie. We'll be fine. Frustration bubbled up inside me. No, we won't be fine. We need to start cutting back now. Our financial situation is serious. Carol smirked. You're overreacting. Sean will take care of everything. He always does. I wanted to scream. Later, Sean walked in and I seized the moment. Sean, we need to talk about the spending. Carol and Bradley are not listening. This can't go on. Sean sighed, looking weary. Can we talk about this later, Val? It's too early for arguments. I grabbed a stack of bills from the counter. No, we need to talk now. Look at these. We're drowning and no one is helping. He glanced at the bills, then back at me. Val, you stress too much. We'll get through it. How, Sean? By ignoring the problem and hoping it goes away? We need to set limits, and it starts with Bradley and Carol. He rubbed his temples. I'm tired, Val. Just let it go for now. Fuming, I left the kitchen, feeling more isolated than ever. No one was listening. That evening, I tried to talk to Bradley again while he was playing video games. Bradley, can we talk? He didn't even pause the game. About what? How you're going to tell me to stop having fun? This isn't about fun, Bradley. It's about responsibility. We need to work together as a family. Whatever, Valerie, he said, eyes glued to the screen. Bradley, this is serious. We need to make changes. Your behavior affects everyone. He finally looked at me, irritation clear on his face. I'm not changing for you. Deal with it. As I walked away, I passed Carol, who had been listening. You need to stop pushing him, Valerie. You're making things worse. I'm trying to help. We can't keep pretending everything is fine. You're the one causing problems, she said coldly before turning away. The days passed and the tension in the house grew thicker. One afternoon, I found Carol in the living room, arranging a pile of shopping bags. Carol, more shopping? We've talked about this. She shrugged, not bothered. Bradley needed new clothes. He's a growing boy. That we can't afford new clothes constantly. There are more important things we need to focus on. Sean said it's fine, she replied nonchalantly. Infuriated, I cornered Sean that night after dinner. Sean, enough is enough. We need to set boundaries. He looked exhausted and annoyed. What do you want me to do, Val? They won't listen to you, and they won't listen to me either. Then we'll sink. Is that what you want? I asked, my voice trembling. Sean didn't have an answer. As I watched him retreat into silence, something broke inside me. If they wouldn't change, maybe it was time I did. Ever since our last argument, a heavy silence filled the house. That silence broke when I walked into the living room one afternoon and saw Bradley tearing open a large box. What's that? I asked, already dreading the answer. Bradley's eyes lit up. A new gaming console. Grandma bought it for me. My heart sank. How could Carol keep doing this? I turned to find her standing in the doorway, her expression smug. Carol, we cannot keep buying expensive things. We have bills to pay. Carol crossed her arms. Valerie, it's a small gift. Bradley's been having a hard time. He deserves something nice. We can't afford nice right now, Carol. You know that. Don't be such a stick in the mud, Valerie. He's just a kid. I was furious. Enough, Carol. This kind of spending is sinking us. Sean walked in just as I was about to snap. What's going on? Carol bought Bradley a new gaming console, I said, shaking with anger. Sean rubbed his forehead. Val, can we not fight over this? Let's talk about it later. There's nothing to talk about, Sean. We need to make changes now. This isn't sustainable. He sighed, looking between Carol and me. We'll figure it out. I stormed out of the room, feeling utterly defeated. They were never going to change, and I was hitting a wall every single time. The next morning, I decided to take action. I waited until Bradley left for school and Carol went out shopping. Then I sat Sean down at the kitchen table. Sean, we need to make some serious changes. This is out of control, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Valerie, I know you're struggling, but what do you expect me to do? He asked, exasperated. You need to start supporting me. Put your foot down with Carol and Bradley. We need to budget and stick to it. I'll talk to them, he said warily, but I had heard that before. No, Sean, you need to do more than talk. You need to enforce it, I said firmly. He looked at me for a long moment. I'll try, he finally said. But try wasn't enough. The following week, nothing changed. Carol continued her shopping sprees, and Bradley kept getting what he wanted. I felt like I was sinking into quicksand. Then, one evening, I overheard Carol talking to a friend on the phone. Valerie's always nagging about money. She needs to relax. Sean will take care of everything like he always does. That was the last straw. I waited until she hung up before confronting her. Carol, enough is enough. You can't keep treating this situation lightly. We need to stop this reckless spending. Carol looked at me with contempt. Valerie, you're overstepping. Who do you think you are? This is my son's house. It's my house, too, and I have a say in how we manage it. Sean's in charge, and he'll make the decisions. Not you, she said, glaring at me. I turned to Sean, who had been standing silently in the doorway. Are you going to let her speak for you? He looked uncomfortable. Val, let's just calm down. We can talk about this. No, Sean. We've talked enough. This has to stop now. Carol smirked. See, Sean? Valerie's just causing trouble. I felt the walls closing in. Without more support from Sean, nothing would change. It was up to me to decide what my breaking point was and what I was willing to tolerate. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made up my mind. Sean might not back me up, but I had to stand my ground. This cycle had to end, one way or another. The tension in the house reached a boiling point the next morning. Carol was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she brewed coffee. Bradley was shoveling cereal into his mouth, ignoring me as usual. I took a deep breath and walked over to the coffee machine. Carol, we need to talk. She glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. What now, Valerie? I kept my voice steady. This can't go on. The spending, the disrespect, we're in a financial crisis and no one is listening. Valerie, is this really necessary? You're blowing things out of proportion, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I'm not, I said firmly. Sean and I have talked, and we need to make some drastic changes. Carol scoffed. Talked? He'll come to his senses like he always does. You can't change how we live. Actually, I can, I replied. I'm not moving into the new house. This has gone too far. I've had enough. The room went silent. Even Bradley looked up from his cereal. You can't be serious, Carol said, her voice rising. Sean, tell her she's being ridiculous. Sean stood in the doorway, looking helpless. Val, are you sure this is what you want? I nodded. I've thought about it, Sean. I'm done enabling this behavior. I need a break from all of this. You can't just leave, Bradley said, standing up. Who's going to handle everything? This I'm sure you'll manage, I replied, keeping my voice calm. Sean stepped forward. Valerie, we're a family. You can't just walk out. Watch me, I said. The determination in my voice surprised even me. That night, I packed my bags. Every creak of the suitcase zippers sounded louder in the quiet house. Sean came into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Val, please reconsider. We can make things better. I've given it 4 years. Nothing's changed. I need to take care of myself now. How can you do this to us? To me? His voice broke, and for a moment I saw the vulnerability in his eyes that I'd fallen in love with. But it wasn't enough to hold me back this time. I'm doing this for me, Sean. I need space, and I need peace. With my bags packed, I stood at the door. Bradley stormed past me, his face twisted with anger. You're just a quitter, he spat. I ignored the sting of his words and walked out, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. In the new apartment, the silence was different. Peaceful, almost welcoming. As the days went by, I started to find a rhythm, a sense of self that had been lost in the chaos. Back at the old house, things began to unravel. I received a call from Sean late one evening. Valerie, we need you. Things are falling apart here. His voice was laced with panic. You need to handle it, Sean. I've done my part. Please, can you at least think about coming back? I can't, Sean. You need to face the consequences of your choices. I need to move on. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, knowing I had finally taken control of my life. I closed the door to my new apartment with a sense of resolve. The place was small but clean, a blank canvas ready for a fresh start. I began to unpack my life, each item a reminder of what I had left behind. Sean's calls were increasingly desperate. Val, we can't manage without you. The bills are piling up. The house is a mess, he confessed during one of our conversations. Sean, you need to step up. I can't keep saving you. I replied firmly. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into a new routine. I found solace in the simplicity of my new life. Carol's incessant calls were easy to ignore, each one more shrill and panic-stricken than the last. One morning, while I sipped my coffee, I received a knock on the door. Opening it, I was surprised to see Bradley standing there, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen him. Bradley, what are you doing here? I asked, keeping my surprise in check. I need help, he mumbled, looking at his feet. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He shuffled in, looking around the small, tidy apartment. This place, it's different. It's mine, I replied simply. Now what's going on? Things are bad at home. Grandma's health isn't great, and Dad, he's just not handling it, Bradley said, his voice cracking. Bradley, you know I can't go back. I needed to make a change. I know, but we're drowning. Dad's been laid off and Grandma had to sell the house. We're living in an apartment now, but it's not enough. I dropped out of school to work. I felt a pang of sympathy, but kept my expression neutral. Bradley, that's not the answer. You need to take responsibility, but not like this. He looked at me, eyes pleading. What should I do then? How do I fix this? You start from the bottom, Bradley. Get a job, finish your education, and understand what it means to be responsible. It takes time, but it's the only way. I know I treated you horribly. I was wrong. I need to make things right, but I don't know how, he confessed, tears welling up in his eyes. You took the first step by coming here. The rest is up to you. If you need guidance, I'm here. But I won't solve your problems for you. Bradley nodded, wiping his eyes. Thanks, Valerie. I'll work on it. As he left, I felt a strange sense of closure. The boy who had once been my greatest source of frustration was now seeking my guidance. It wasn't revenge I wanted, but change, and it seemed like it was finally starting to happen. Later that evening, I picked up my phone and dialed Sean. Hey, we need to talk. Val, I miss you. We need you. I need you. His voice was barely above a whisper. I can't come back, Sean, but I wanted to check in. How's Bradley? He's trying. He's working and planning to go back to school. I think your leaving was a wake-up call for all of us. I'm glad to hear that, but Sean, you need to learn to manage without me. I know, I'm learning, slowly, but I am. As I hung up, I felt a sense of accomplishment. My departure had forced change, real change. It wasn't instant, but it was happening. A small smile crept onto my face. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time I felt like I had made a real difference. As weeks turned into months, I heard less from Sean and more about their struggles through mutual friends. It seemed reality had finally caught up with them. One evening, I got a call from an old friend who had run into Sean at the grocery store. Valerie, I saw Sean today. He looked terrible, asked if you knew he lost his job, she said. The news hit me, but I stayed calm. Thanks for letting me know. How's Bradley? Doing his best. From what Sean said, working part-time and trying to finish school, she replied. Good to hear. I said, trying to mask my concern. The next day I got a call from Sean himself. His voice was strained. "Valerie, things have gotten worse. I don't know what to do." "What happened, Sean?" "I got laid off, Val. We can't keep up with the expenses. Carol's health is declining and Bradley's trying, but it's not enough," he said, defeat ringing in his tone. "This was never supposed to happen," he continued. "I thought we could handle this." "Sean, you have to take control. Talk to your mother. Set boundaries. It's the only way." "But she won't listen to me. She never did." "She has to now, or you'll all suffer the consequences," I replied firmly. "I'll try," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Time passed and the storm continued to rage at their end. One evening I decided to take a walk. Fresh air always cleared my mind. As I passed by my old neighborhood, I saw Bradley working at the local car wash. He looked worn out but focused. "Hey, Bradley," I called out. He looked up, surprised but pleased to see me. "Valerie, hey." "How's it going?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's tough," he admitted, "but I'm managing, trying to save up and finish high school." "I'm proud of you for sticking it out," I said. "Thank you," he replied, gratitude in his eyes. I realized I took a lot for granted. I should have listened to you sooner. "It's never too late to change," I said. "Keep working hard and things will get better." He nodded, determination etched on his face. "I will." Walking back, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. I cared for them, but I also knew they needed this struggle to truly understand the value of responsibility. A few nights later, I received another call from Sean. This time, his tone was desperate. "Val, Carol's health is really bad. We had to sell the house and move into a small apartment. It's all falling apart." "I'm sorry to hear that, Sean. You two made choices that led to this," I said, trying to stay firm but compassionate. "Can you help, Val? Please." "I don't know what else to do," he pleaded. "You need to face this, Sean. Learn from it." "I see that now. I see how much we relied on you, but it's too late," he said softly. "You can still turn things around. Focus on Bradley and make things right with him." "I will. Thank you, Val." As we ended the call, I realized their downfall was the wake-up call they needed. It was painful to see them struggle, but necessary for true change. They had to experience the consequences of their actions to learn and grow. Despite the chaos, I felt a sense of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter for all of us, one filled with hard-earned lessons and the promise of a better future. I was in the middle of organizing my apartment when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, but the name on the screen caught my eye. Sean. "Valerie, I hate to ask, but I really need your help," he said, voice strained. "What happened now?" I asked, bracing myself. "We're being evicted. I don't know where else to turn." He admitted. I took a deep breath. "Sean, you ignored my warnings for years. Why do you expect me to help now?" "Please, Val, I've realized how much you did for us. We can't manage without you." "You chose to ignore me, Sean. You need to face the consequences." "But what about Bradley? He needs stability," he pleaded. I closed my eyes, considering. "Bradley is trying to make things right, but you have to lead by example, Sean." "I'll do anything. Just help us get back on our feet," he said, desperation clear in his voice. "I'll think about it, but understand this, Sean. I won't be your crutch anymore." We hung up, and I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to rush in and fix everything, but I knew that wouldn't help them in the long run. A week later, I got another call from Sean. "Valerie, we've found a small place we can afford, but I need a loan for the deposit. Can you help?" "Sean, I'll lend you the money, but this is the last time. You have to make a plan and stick to it." "I promise, Val. This time will be different." We arranged to meet at a cafe to finalize the loan. As I arrived, I saw Sean sitting at a corner table, looking more worn than I'd ever seen him. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I'm doing this for Bradley," I replied. Sean nodded. "I understand. We'll pay you back, I swear." I handed him the check. "Make sure you do, and start taking responsibility. Bradley needs you to be strong." "I know, I will. Thank you, Val," he said sincerely. As I left the cafe, I hoped this would be the turning point for them. Days passed, and I focused on my own life. One afternoon, I received a call from Bradley. "Valerie, can we meet? I have something to show you." Curious, I agreed. We met at a small park. Bradley looked healthier, more focused. "Look," he said, showing me a report card. "I passed all my classes. I'm graduating next month." "Bradley, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you," I said, genuinely happy. Thanks, Valerie. I couldn't have done it without your guidance. You did the hard work, Bradley. Keep it up. As we sat and talked, I realized how much he had grown. He was maturing into a responsible young man. How's Sean? I asked. He's trying. He's working 2 jobs now and managing the finances better. Good to hear. Stay on track, both of you. We will, Valerie. We've learned a lot from this, he said. Walking back to my apartment, I felt a sense of closure. They were finally learning from their mistakes, and I had played my part. A few weeks later, I got another call from Sean. Val, I wanted you to know we've paid the first month's rent on time. Things are looking up. I'm glad to hear that, Sean. Keep it up. I will. Thank you for everything. As the call ended, I felt a sense of peace. My decision to leave had been the catalyst for real change. While they still had a long way to go, they were finally on the right path. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe easy, knowing I had made the right choices for myself and, indirectly, for them as well. A few months passed, and life carried on without much contact from Sean and Bradley. One day, while returning from the grocery store, my phone buzzed with a message from Bradley. Valerie, can you meet me at the park? Need to talk. I agreed, curious and maybe a little concerned. When I arrived, I found Bradley sitting alone on a bench, a somber look on his face. What's going on? I asked, taking a seat beside him. It's Grandma. She's not doing well. We had to sell her part of the house to pay for medical bills, he confessed, eyes downcast. I'm sorry to hear that, Bradley, I said sincerely. It's been really tough. Dad's trying, but he's stretched so thin. We're just surviving day by day. I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You've come a long way, Bradley. Don't lose hope. I know. It's just hard seeing everything fall apart. His voice broke. You've got to stay strong for yourself and for your dad. Thanks, Valerie. It means a lot to hear you say that. I'm always here if you need to talk, I reassured him. On my way home, I thought about Carol. She had never shown me kindness, but seeing her suffer now didn't bring me joy either. This was karma playing out in real life, teaching its harsh lessons. A week later, Sean called me. His voice was weary. Val, it's Carol. She's bedridden now, and we have to move her to a care facility. We can't handle her medical needs. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, trying to balance empathy with my own emotional distance. Any advice on what we can do? Look into community resources. There are programs that can help you manage financially and medically. I will. Thanks, Val. I appreciate it, he said, his voice sincere. A month later, as I was strolling through town, I ran into an old neighbor who told me Carol had moved into a small apartment near the care facility. The news left me feeling a strange mix of vindication and pity. One rainy afternoon, I stopped by the local diner for a coffee. As I entered, I saw Bradley cleaning tables. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. Valerie, hey. Hey, Bradley. How's it going? Better. Dad got a more stable job, and I'm working here part-time while finishing high school. I'm glad to hear that. Keep working hard. I will. Thanks for everything, Val, he said earnestly. As I left the diner, I bumped into Sean. He looked older, more worn, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Valerie, he said, his tone softer than I remembered. Sean, I replied, keeping my emotions in check. I wanted to thank you. Your leaving made us wake up. We're still struggling, but at least we're trying now. I'm glad to hear that. You know, Sean, it's never too late to change. He nodded. We're learning that the hard way. As we stood there, the rain pouring around us, I felt the closure I had longed for finally settling in. The Turner family had learned their lessons through the trials they'd faced, and while it had been a difficult journey, it was clear they were on a path to redemption. Take care, Sean, I said, turning to leave. You too, Val, he replied, his voice carrying a sense of genuine appreciation. Walking away, I felt lighter. The drama and chaos that once filled my life had dissipated, leaving room for new beginnings. Bradley's growth, Sean's newfound responsibility, and even Carol's change of circumstances were all part of the greater tapestry of life's lessons learned. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace, knowing my decisions had steered not just me, but all of us towards a better future.